without the possibility of justification or intermediation to the contrary under the terms of indigenous customs or traditions. At least 17 state congresses in Mexico are required for its respective promulgation. In 2020, at least 27,800 indigenous adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 were married. The regions that contributed the most to the overall balance were Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Guerrero. And to Africa, where the president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, has announced the dismissal of Minister Ken Ofori-Atta and others in what is expected to be his last ministerial reshuffle before the nation's crucial December election. The decision comes amid mounting pressure on Ofori-Atta, whose tenure has been marred by economic challenges and public outcry. Mr. Ofori-Atta will be appointed Senior Presidential Advisor on Finance and Special Envoy on International Investment and the Capital Markets, according to Jubilee House sources. President Akufo-Addo expressed his sincere appreciation to Ofori-Atta and the others for their commitment, competence, dedication, and hard work in office. Ghana faced its worst economic crisis in decades in 2022, as inflation surged over 50%, prompting the government to seek a $3 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund. The president's second and last term in office will end in 2025. Now to the Middle East, where Israeli forces today raided Nasser Hospital, the main hospital in southern Gaza's Han Yunis. The Israel Defense Forces said it was conducting an operation to recover the bodies of hostages, while the Gaza Health Ministry accused the IDF of storming the complex after demolishing the southern wall. At least 10 people were killed in Lebanon and at least one in Israel after an exchange of strikes that marked Israel's most forceful attack on its northern neighbor since the start of the war in Gaza. We have a report.
Israel is facing growing international pressure to hold off on a planned assault on the last refuge for displaced Palestinians in southern Gaza after truce talks in Cairo ended inconclusive. World leaders are ratcheting up pressure on Israel to abandon its plan for a ground offensive in Rafah as an exodus from the southern Gaza city, once declared a safe zone, which shelters more than half the enclave's population, underway. As Israel stepped up its airstrikes and artillery fire, Australia, Canada and New Zealand issued a joint statement calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, warning that Israel's planned operations will have a devastating impact on the Palestinians. Adding to their concerns, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas, which runs Gaza, had presented no new offer for a hostage deal in the Cairo talks, and said Israel will not agree to the Palestinian group's current demands. Spain and Ireland also applied pressure on Israel, asking the European Commission to urgently review whether Israel is complying with its human rights obligations in Gaza. Despite pressure from foreign government and aid agencies to halt its planned operation, Israel insists it must push into the city near the border with Egypt and eliminate Hamas battalions. The World Health Organization representative for Gaza and the West Bank said an assault on Rafah will be an unfathomable catastrophe and will even further expand the humanitarian disaster beyond imagination. The civilian death toll from 2 Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon has risen to 10, making the previous day the deadliest one in more than 4 months of cross-border exchanges. The fatalities marked a significant escalation in more than 4 months of daily cross-border exchanges triggered by the October 7 attack of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. Israeli special forces have entered Nasser Hospital in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. Doctors and medical officials say Israeli snipers shot dead multiple people as they tried to leave the hospital, the largest remaining functional medical facility in Gaza. Doctors and medical officials in Gaza also say Israeli snipers had shot dead a number of people as they tried to leave the medical complex. Israel's war on Gaza today has killed at least 28,663 people, with at least 68,395 others wounded. Also, 87 Palestinians have been killed and 104 wounded over the past 24 hours.
Let's bring in Global Affairs analyst Nick Agule for more on this development. Good to have you join us.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to our viewers.
So in the last few hours or so, Canada, Australia and New Zealand have joined international calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. But the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his far-right government have remained defiant. Why do you think he's insisting on pressing on with this offensive in Rafah?
There are several reasons why Prime Minister Netanyahu will want to press on with his operations, his country's operations in the Gaza Strip. First and foremost, it's about his cabinet. His cabinet is replete with right-wing people who don't want to hear the word ceasefire. So he's having pressure from that point. And of course, he's also looking at the feelings of the Israelis, because as we speak today, there are people who lost their loved ones in that invasion. And also, there are people whose relations are held hostage as of today. And they're putting pressure on the government of Netanyahu to say, you must go and release our hostages. And people see a ceasefire as a break in transmission of the efforts to go and release those hostages. So it is a domestic thing for Netanyahu. He knows that he's dealing with a very delicate situation. While on the domestic end, both his cabinet and his people are pushing him to go ahead with the operations in Gaza. He is fast losing the support of his friends on the international scene, because it is these friends that he relies on for arms supplies and for other monies that he needs to prosecute this war. So this is where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has found himself.
And he's in between, you know, the devil and the deep blue sea, as it were. But I was going to ask you, in terms of these warnings coming from the international community to him and Israel, do these warnings to him go without consequences?
And of course, there will be consequences, because you see, the point is that the international community have been solidly behind him up to this point. But they themselves are also facing pressures. So in the US, in the UK, in Germany, France, in all of the international community, the leaders there are also facing pressure from their people. Because as much as people would like Hamas, a terrorist organization, to be eliminated from the face of the earth, they also see that the human cost of civilians is getting out of hand. You know, so these global leaders are facing pressures from their own people in their home countries, and that is what is now making them to now make a U-turn and say, look, Israel, you have to look at this prosecution of this war in a different way. So like the United States is very clear. Okay, if you must continue with these operations, you don't have to touch civilians. But how is that going to be possible? You know, the civilian population is certainly going to be the collateral damage, because Hamas embed themselves in the civilian population. So at the end of the day, if this impasse continues, something is going to give. Something is going to give. And I think the odds weigh heavily on the side of Prime Minister Netanyahu giving in.
And if he remains defiant and decides to escalate its bombardments on Rafah, what are the immediate implications of that expansion of fighting, especially for the region?
Yeah, so it's going to be a problem. both for the Western world and even for the Arab world. Because let's not forget, the Arab world are watching this thing. They don't like it, but at the same time, they don't like Hamas that much. So they are just, they themselves, the Arab world is itself caught out in between this crisis. Much as they will want Hamas to be obliterated off the face of the earth, they are also looking at the civilian casualties, you know. And the current situation is that pressure will mount on Prime Minister Netanyahu if he remains defiant and continues with this operation, because the Arab world tensions will start building up in the Arab world, and he doesn't want another Arab-Israeli war. He will be fast losing his friends in the West that he depends on for arms and money. And then the world is going to look at the humanitarian crisis, and I think even his friends who were supporting him before will look at it, and they look at the civilian casualties, and they look at everything, and they will say, no, this is too much. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, there's an extent to which his defiance.
Absolutely, but we will see. Yeah. We will see whether or not they can influence Israel's position. That's the international community. Thank you so much for talking to us. Global Affairs Analyst Nick Agule.
Thank you and have a nice day.